All right, so let's talk about the reading. You guys already have your notes out, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so first the textbook. So there were a couple significant things that we should probably discuss. What was that formula that I told you guys last time? Yeah.
Context equals meaning.
There you go. Another thing that came from that, which is saying the same thing in a way, it's leading into it, is conversation over isolation. Right? So think about that. It's always going to be a conversation. There's always going to be someone saying something either against or along with what you are saying. There's always something that you are responding to, right? Did we all get that? Everything. Remember, the entire world is a conversation of humans who have existed for however long you believe we've existed and operated within civilization together, right? From the moment that we were able to communicate with each other, which doesn't even include language, right? That could have just been like pointing and stuff like that. But from that point, there was a conversation going on. And you have now entered that conversation at a very dark time. What else was important that you got out of chapters 1 and 2? Drowning in details. So if we're talking about like a summary, so you have this, by the way, so you can write it on here. So you're going to need to put a definition of a summary and a definition of analysis. So first, summary. I mean, details do go in here, right? But what kind of details? Huh? What was that? Yeah, but what about it, right? So talking about, like, let's say the cat reading. Was it important that you knew that she ate after 8 mints? Or that her cat ate tuna melts? Was that important details that you would put in a summary? No. You need to always understand the question plus this. That's a plus sign, by the way, right there. So there's the content plus context, but there's also the question that's being asked about it, right? And so when you summarize, what is the specific details for the summary are going to need to be relevant to whatever the heck the question was asking you to do. That includes a prompt also, right? This is all very simple, obvious stuff that you, like when you hear me say it, you're like, yeah, of course, right? And yet you still need to remember this every single time that a question is asked. It needs to become muscle memory. And I mean, oftentimes you'll misunderstand it. Did we read anything about that? About any misunderstandings? Was there a term in one of the chapters? Closest cliche. Does anyone know what a cliche is? That's not in your summary definition. I'm a mess on here. I hope your notes are better than my whiteboard. But do you guys know what a cliche is? What's a cliche?
So predictable.
Yeah, it's predictable, or it's, there's a little more to it, though. So, someone's driving poorly, or they're taking forever to like get into a parking spot, and then you see the driver, and you're like, oh, they're Asian. What is that? What am I doing now?
You're stereotyping.
I'm stereotyping them. Hey, they're stereotyping themselves. All right. No. Yeah, it's both. I think it's both. Right? There's people who you can fall into a stereotype, right? Yeah. Like we do it, right? It's true, and sometimes stereotypes do fit. It's funny. We reinstate them once we see, because the first thing you notice about someone is the way they look, right? And so then you equate it to that, and not that they're young, right? or not that, there's so many other things that are variables, and yet instead of going and trying to understand the variables that made that person a horrible driver, you just go to the thing that it's obviously this. All this, right? Same thing, so cliches, you'll hear them about all kinds of stuff, like love, right? What's love?
I don't know.
Got to do with it. Or love is a battlefield. Or love is like a rose. Love is a rose because it's beautiful but it's got thorns and crap
And it dies eventually.
and then it dies. Yeah, that's good. You're obviously a realist. So the cliche is that you assume a meaning to it. You ascribe something to it that's the easiest meaning for you to put on it. So what happens with closest cliche is oftentimes what happens to you when you're in an argument with someone. You ever notice that you stopped listening to them? Their mouth's still moving, but you've already started processing what you're going to say next? You ever do that?
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll just start before they even finish, right? So this is the thing that we often do is we just assume we know what they meant or where they were going with it. I knew where you were going with it. You don't. You don't know where they were going with it. Now, if they're your parent and they say the same thing over and over and over again, you can kind of feel that person out, especially when they're just like, you know what I'm talking about, right? They say the same exact story or the same exact thing. They are turning themselves into a cliche, and then there's nothing you can do about it, right? But if you're in a conversation with someone that you don't know so well, or they're bringing up something that you haven't really, you think you know what they're talking about, you might not know. Or maybe your parent is starting with that story that you've always heard, but then they're going to go somewhere else with it. Like you don't know. You have to hear it all the way through. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It means in order to address it and answer it properly, you have to understand it and not let it fall into a closest cliche. So there's two things that happen with a summary. So it has to be the things that are relevant. What is important for your use? Which your use is not just for whatever the heck you feel like. Your use is probably to answer a question or to answer a prompt or something like that. Yeah? Okay, so that part, and then also making sure that you are properly representing the material. Right? So when you summarize something, sure, the most obvious definition of a summary is something that's shorter and smaller than the original. You like my little graphics here? This is as good as it gets. Here's a bigger box and here's a smaller box. Which one's the summary? Theoretically, this is just an example, right? It's obviously not a summary. I mean, it is a box, but it doesn't have the same measurements, so it's actually kind of false if you want to pick it apart. Let's not do that. This is like the third day, all right? But you get the point, right? So a summary is obviously supposed to be smaller. That is the whole point of a summary, right? If you're just told to give a description, shoot, a description could be something that's longer than the original, right? Because you could go into all kinds of details. But when it comes to the components or what the summary needs to do, is it needs to have all the important things that are relevant to what you're doing with it, and then be properly representing it. So that means you have to understand it properly first. That means you don't cut it off or you don't cut that person off. What kinds of things can you summarize? Huh? Books. You can summarize books. Speeches. That's true. Articles, right? Can you summarize a movie? Yeah. TV show, radio show, speeches. Can you summarize this table?
You can describe it. Yeah.
And so give some form of summary of it, right? Has 4 legs. Is it a dining table?
It could be.
Well,
That way.
hey, there we go. To each their own. But you get the point, right? You can summarize pretty much anything. You can even summarize a person. They don't like it when you do that, though, right? Also, you have the tendency of falling into the closest cliche, because unless that person is just a cliche, then they're going to be multifaceted, and there's going to be all kinds of things about them. So oftentimes when you summarize a person, you end up stereotyping them, because there's no way you could know them well enough to summarize them unless they are basic, and there's nothing to them. But the problem is, a lot of times people couldn't even summarize themselves because they don't truly know themselves very well, because we spend a lot of time not trying to understand ourselves. We spend a lot of time trying to show other people something that we want them to see. You know what I mean? And then we oftentimes end up believing that thing about ourselves after time. Yeah? We'll get into that a little bit more later. So yeah, the whole summary thing, that's super important. Then what again is analysis? You're writing these things down, right? Yeah. What's analysis?
Describe something.
I mean, you have to do that in analysis. Huh? Yeah, analyzing. So that's in a sentence, right? Analyze the text. What are you supposed to do to the text when you break it down? That's right. So analysis is breaking it down into its key components, right? So that you can examine it more closely. And so that's it goes a little further, and sometimes you need to analyze something in order to summarize it if it's really complex, but then, likewise vice versa. So we will, you're going to do this on your own. Pull out your fingers. No, your course outline. All right, so you'll see really quick here. Nope. I'm just going to leave this in too. This isn't getting edited out. In fact, I'm going to make it like 4 minutes long. That would be horrible to do, right? People are like, oh, this is where this is going.